Welcome to the Numis Explorer, the place where ordinary-looking coins can lead to extraordinary discoveries, and today we are exploring the fascinating story of the 1964 1-cent coin and the incredible possibilities that can make a seemingly simple Lincoln cent worth far more than its 1-cent face value. Imagine finding a 1964 Lincoln cent in an old collection, a forgotten coin jar, a family box, or even loose change and discovering that something about it is dramatically different from a normal example. That is exactly why collectors examine old cents so carefully, because unusual mint errors, rare varieties, exceptional preservation, and documented history can transform an ordinary coin into a highly desirable collectible. You may hear sensational claims that a 1964 1-cent coin could be worth $148 million, but such a figure should be understood as an extraordinary claim rather than the normal value of a standard 1964 cent. A genuine coin would require extraordinary rarity, authentication, condition, provenance, and collector demand before any extreme valuation could even be considered. The exciting part is learning what kinds of characteristics could make a 1964 cent genuinely special. One of the first things collectors look for is an off-center strike. This happens when the blank planchet is not positioned correctly between the dies, causing the design to be struck away from the center. A dramatic off-center error can leave part of the coin's design missing while exposing an unusual portion of blank surface, and the more dramatic and clearly authentic the error, the more interesting it can become. Another possibility is a broad strike, which can occur when the collar does not properly restrain the planchet during striking. Instead of maintaining the normal shape and dimensions, the coin can spread outward, producing an unusual appearance that is immediately noticeable when compared with a normal cent. Collectors also look for multiple strikes, where the coin may have been struck more than once, potentially creating overlapping or shifted details. A dramatic double strike can be especially fascinating because it provides evidence of something unusual happening during the minting process. Another major area of interest is double dies. However, it is important to understand that genuine double die characteristics are different from ordinary machine doubling or post-mint damage. Genuine doubling originates during die creation and can produce recognizable separation or duplication in specific design elements, while many forms of apparent doubling are simply mechanical effects that do not carry the same collector value. The date and lettering should therefore be examined carefully rather than assuming every doubled appearance is rare. Die cracks and die breaks are another category that can attract attention. As dies become worn or damaged, cracks can develop, and in some cases a piece of the die can break away, leaving a raised area on the finished coin. A substantial cut or dramatic die break can be particularly collectible because it represents a real event in the production of the coin. Struck-through errors are another possibility, occurring when foreign material becomes involved between the die and planchet during striking and leaves an unusual impression. Depending on the material, location, and strength of the resulting design, a struck-through error can be fascinating to collectors. There can also be clipped planchets, where part of the metal blank is missing before the coin is struck, sometimes producing a distinctive curved edge. These errors are very different from damage caused after the coin entered circulation, and understanding that difference is one of the most important skills for anyone searching for valuable cents. A coin may look strange because someone bent it, scratched it, squeezed it, chemically altered it, or exposed it to harsh conditions, but those forms of damage generally do not have the same value as a genuine mint-made error. That is why authentication matters so much when discussing extraordinary prices. Condition is another major factor that can influence the desirability of a 1964 cent. A heavily circulated coin with worn details and damaged surfaces may have limited collectible value, while an exceptionally preserved example with strong details, attractive surfaces, and minimal marks can attract considerably more interest. Original color and surface quality can also matter to collectors, especially when the coin has survived in remarkable condition for more than 6 decades. When examining your own 1964 cent, look closely at the Lincoln portrait, the date, the lettering, the rim, the edge, and the overall shape. Compare the coin with normal examples and ask whether the unusual feature could have been created at the mint or whether it appears to be ordinary circulation damage. This simple question can prevent many mistakes when searching through old coins. The possibility of a rare discovery becomes even more exciting when a coin has been stored away for decades, because collectors sometimes encounter coins that previous owners never carefully examined. An old jar containing hundreds of cents could include one unusual example that stands out when placed beside ordinary coins. A forgotten collection could contain a coin with a striking error that was overlooked because nobody knew what to look for. Even a coin inherited from a family member could deserve a second examination. However, treasure hunting should always be combined with careful research, because not every unusual coin is rare and not every internet valuation is reliable. A $148 million claim can attract attention, but the real question is whether there is credible evidence supporting such a value. Professional grading, authentication, auction documentation, recognized varieties, and verified sales are much stronger evidence than an unsupported price mentioned in a video or social media post. If you believe your 1964 cent has a major error, avoid cleaning, polishing, scratching, or altering it, because attempts to improve its appearance can actually reduce its desirability and destroy evidence of its original condition. Handle it carefully and consider having an experienced numismatist or professional grading service examine it when the suspected error appears significant. The greatest possibilities come from understanding what makes an error genuine, how rare it is, how clearly it can be identified, and how much collectors actually want that particular type of coin. The history behind mint errors is fascinating because every error represents a moment when the normal manufacturing process did not go exactly as planned. A misplaced planchet, damaged die, multiple strike, clipped blank, broad strike, or struck through event can leave behind a tiny piece of evidence showing what happened inside the mint. That history is part of what gives error coins their appeal. For a 1964 1-cent coin, the combination of age, rarity, condition, and an authentic mint error could make it significantly more interesting than its 1-cent face value suggests. But remember, age alone does not automatically make a coin worth millions, and the majority of 1964 cents are not multi-million-dollar coins. The real treasure is the rare exception with characteristics that can be proven. So if you have a 1964 Lincoln cent sitting somewhere in your home, do not throw it aside without looking carefully. Check the date, inspect the lettering, study the portrait, examine the rim and edge, look for unusual doubling, check for off-center striking, search for clipped areas, and watch for unusual die cracks or other evidence of a mint-made error. Use a magnifying glass if necessary, but do not clean the coin. Compare what you find with trusted numismatic references and seek professional opinions when the evidence looks promising. The possibility that an ordinary-looking cent could contain a remarkable minting mistake is one of the reasons coin collecting remains such an exciting hobby. Millions of coins may look nearly identical, but a tiny difference created during production can sometimes separate a common example from a coin that collectors actively pursue. That is where the real adventure begins. The $148 million figure may sound unbelievable, and it should not be treated as the guaranteed market value of every 1964 cent, but it creates an opportunity to discuss the fascinating world of rare errors, unusual varieties, condition rarities, and the importance of authentication. The more you learn, the better you become at separating genuine treasures from ordinary damage and exaggerated claims. So before you spend, discard, or overlook that old 1964 1-cent coin, give it another careful look. Because you never know what story its surfaces might be hiding. Keep searching your collections, check your old jars, examine inherited coins, and pay attention to unusual details, because the next fascinating discovery could be sitting right in front of you. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious world of the 1964 Lincoln cent and want more stories about rare coins, valuable errors, hidden varieties, and unbelievable numismatic discoveries, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Numis Explorer, and stay connected for more coin hunting adventures, because sometimes the smallest piece of metal can carry the biggest surprise. Next, 1976 1-cent coin. Today we are taking a fascinating journey into the world of the 1976 1-cent coin, a Lincoln cent that can become especially interesting when unusual mint errors, rare varieties, exceptional condition, or other authenticated characteristics are discovered. If you have ever looked through an old coin jar, a family collection, a box of change, or a forgotten group of pennies and wondered whether one of those coins could be worth far more than its face value, this is exactly the kind of search that can make coin collecting so exciting. The 1976 1-cent coin is more than a small piece of copper-colored metal. It represents a moment in American history, and some examples may attract collectors because of unusual characteristics created during the minting process. You may have heard dramatic claims that a 1976 1-cent coin could be worth $140 million because of errors and mistakes, but a figure that enormous should be treated as an extraordinary claim rather than the normal market value of a regular 1976 cent. Most 1976 cents are not worth anything remotely close to such an amount, and their actual value depends on factors such as condition, mintmark, variety, rarity, authenticity, demand, and documented sales. However, the possibility of a truly unusual mint error is what makes searching these coins so interesting. One of the first things collectors may examine is the strike itself. A major off-center strike can happen when the planchet is not properly positioned between the dies, leaving the design noticeably shifted toward one side of the coin. When the error is dramatic and clearly authentic, the coin can become much more desirable than an ordinary example. The amount of displacement, whether the date remains visible, the overall condition, and the rarity of the error can all influence collector interest. Another possibility is a broad strike, which can occur when the collar does not properly contain the planchet during striking. Instead of producing the normal shape and edge profile, the metal may spread outward, creating an unusually wide or distorted appearance. A broad-struck 1976 cent can look very different from a normal penny, and that difference is exactly what makes genuine mint errors fascinating. Collectors may also search for multiple strike errors, where the coin receives more than one impression from the dies. A second strike can create overlapping design elements, shifted details, or duplicated portions of Lincoln's portrait and lettering. The more obvious and well-documented the multiple strike is, the more attention it may receive. Another important area is doubled dies. Genuine doubled die characteristics can occur during the die-making process and may show noticeable separation or duplication in portions of the design. However, this is where careful examination becomes extremely important because not every coin that appears doubled is a genuine doubled die. Machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, circulation damage, and other effects can create appearances that inexperienced collectors may mistake for valuable varieties. A serious collector therefore compares the suspected doubling with known examples and looks at the shape, location, and structure of the affected design rather than simply assuming that any extra line represents a rare error. Die cracks are another possibility that can make a 1976 cent interesting. As a die experiences stress and repeated use, cracks can develop, and those cracks may appear as raised lines on coins struck from that die. In more dramatic situations, a piece of the die can break away, creating a cut or substantial die break feature. Such errors can be highly collectible when they are clearly visible, authentic, and unusual. A struck-through error is another fascinating possibility. This can happen when foreign material comes between the die and planchet during the striking process, leaving an indentation or distorted area on the finished coin. Depending on the material involved and the location of the impression, the result can be very distinctive. Collectors may also encounter clipped planchets, where a portion of the original metal blank is missing before the coin is struck. A genuine clip can produce a characteristic curved or straight missing section along the edge, depending on how the planchet was cut. Again, this is very different from damage caused after the coin entered circulation. That distinction is essential because many old coins have scratches, dents, bends, holes, flattened rims, or other marks caused by years of handling, and those conditions generally do not make the coin a valuable mint error. A coin that has been deliberately altered or damaged should not automatically be considered rare simply because it looks unusual. The key question is whether the unusual feature can be traced back to the minting process. Another major factor is condition. A 1976 cent that has spent decades in circulation may show worn lettering, faded details, scratches, discoloration, and surface marks, while an exceptionally preserved example can retain sharp details and attractive surfaces. High-grade coins can attract more attention when they combine excellent preservation with a recognized variety or genuine mint error. Collectors may carefully inspect the Lincoln portrait, the date, the lettering, the rim, the edge, and the overall strike to determine whether something unusual is present. The mint mark can also be important because coins from different facilities and production circumstances can have different collecting characteristics. When examining a 1976 cent, it is useful to record every visible detail instead of focusing on only one strange mark. Look at the entire coin from multiple angles and compare it with a normal 1976 example. A genuine error often has a logical relationship to the minting process, while random damage may appear irregular or inconsistent with how a coin would be struck. This kind of careful observation can prevent disappointment and can also help identify coins that deserve further research. Imagine finding a 1976 cent in an old jar that appears normal at first glance, then noticing that the design is dramatically off-center. You might discover that the rim is unusually broad, the lettering has an unusual doubled appearance, or a section of the design contains a distinctive die break. That moment is what makes coin hunting so exciting. Sometimes a coin that has been ignored for decades can suddenly become the subject of serious investigation simply because someone noticed one small detail. This is why collectors continue to search through old coins even when most examples are common. The possibility of discovering an unusual survivor keeps the hobby alive. However, the $140 million figure should not be interpreted as a guaranteed value for a 1976 1-cent coin. Extraordinary price claims require extraordinary evidence. A coin would need exceptional rarity, professional authentication, documented provenance, strong collector demand, and credible market evidence before a valuation at that level could even be considered. Auction results and verified transactions are much more reliable than unsupported claims posted online. If you believe your 1976 cent contains a major error, do not clean or polish it. Cleaning can damage the original surfaces and may make the coin less desirable to collectors. Handle it carefully by the edges and consider obtaining an expert opinion if the suspected feature appears genuinely significant. Professional grading and authentication can help determine whether a suspected error is real and whether the coin has characteristics recognized by the numismatic community. Even when a coin does not turn out to be a multi-million-dollar discovery, the investigation itself can be valuable because it teaches you how minting errors occur and how professional collectors evaluate coins. The history behind error coins is especially fascinating because each genuine error tells a story about a moment when the normal manufacturing process went wrong. A misplaced planchet, a malfunctioning collar, a damaged die, a multiple strike, a clipped blank, or foreign material entering the striking area can leave permanent evidence on a coin. That tiny piece of evidence can survive for decades and eventually become the reason a collector takes a second look. There are also possibilities involving planchet abnormalities, where the metal blank itself may have unusual characteristics before the coin is struck. Such abnormalities can sometimes affect the final appearance and may be interesting if they are confirmed as genuine mint-produced errors. But once again, authentication matters because environmental damage and post-mint alterations can create similar-looking effects. A 1976 cent that has been exposed to chemicals, heat, moisture, or other harsh conditions can develop strange coloration or surface textures, but these changes are not automatically valuable. Originality is one of the most important concepts in coin collecting. Collectors want to know that the unusual feature existed because of the minting process rather than something that happened years later. This is why comparisons with certified examples and trusted numismatic references are so useful. When searching through a collection, you can create a simple habit: first identify the date and mint mark, then examine the overall condition, then inspect the major design elements, and finally look for unusual characteristics that appear to be part of the original strike. Pay particular attention to the rim because some errors become easier to recognize there. Next, 1981 1-cent coin. Today we are taking a closer look at the 1981 1-cent coin, a familiar-looking Lincoln cent that most people might spend without a second thought, but under the right circumstances, an unusual example with a genuine minting error, extraordinary condition, or extremely rare variety could become a major prize for collectors. So before you toss an old penny into a jar, drawer, or pocket, take a closer look, because tiny details can sometimes tell a much bigger story, and the idea of a 1981 1-cent being worth as much as $135 million is an extraordinary claim that should be treated as a hypothetical or sensational maximum rather than a normal market value, because no ordinary 1981 Lincoln cent is automatically worth anything close to that amount. But the fascinating question is what kinds of errors, mistakes, varieties, condition factors, and unusual circumstances could theoretically make a coin dramatically more valuable than its 1-cent face value, and that is exactly what makes this coin so interesting to examine. The 1981 Lincoln cent belongs to a period when billions of cents were produced for everyday commerce, meaning most surviving examples are common, but rarity in coin collecting does not always depend simply on the date printed on the coin. Instead, collectors pay close attention to unusual production characteristics that can separate an ordinary example from an extraordinary one. One of the first things to examine is the mint mark, because a 1981 cent can have different production origins, and the location and appearance of the mint mark can help establish where the coin was made and which varieties may deserve further examination. Collectors should also carefully inspect the date, lettering, portrait, rim, Lincoln memorial design, and overall surfaces, because unusual doubling, die damage, strike problems, or other abnormalities can create legitimate collectible interest. A possible double die is one of the most exciting features collectors look for, because a true double die variety occurs during the die-making process and can produce noticeable separation or doubling on certain design elements, particularly letters, numbers, or parts of the portrait. However, not every coin showing something that looks doubled is a valuable double die, because machine doubling, die deterioration, damage, scratches, and post-mint contact can create misleading appearances. This is why serious collectors examine the shape, direction, location, and consistency of the apparent doubling rather than simply assuming that every unusual-looking letter represents a fortune. Another fascinating possibility is an off-center strike, which happens when the blank or planchet is not properly positioned between the dies during striking, potentially leaving part of the design shifted toward one side and sometimes creating a dramatic crescent of blank metal. The greater the displacement, while still retaining important identifying features, the more visually interesting the error can become, although value depends heavily on authenticity, condition, severity, and collector demand. A broad strike is another possible minting error that can attract attention, especially when the coin was struck without the normal retaining collar and expands beyond its intended diameter while still displaying recognizable design details. A clipped planchet can also create an unusual shape if part of the metal blank was missing before the striking process, and genuine clips often show characteristics that distinguish them from coins damaged after leaving the mint. Wrong planchet errors can be even more dramatic, because a coin struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or another composition can produce unusual weight, size, color, or design characteristics. Such errors are rare because several production controls normally prevent mismatched planchets from reaching the wrong striking press, which is precisely why authenticated examples can attract serious collector attention. Another possibility is a die cap or brockage-related error, where unusual interaction between a die and another coin or planchet can create distorted design features. These errors can be visually spectacular, but they must be authenticated carefully because ordinary damage can sometimes imitate dramatic mint mistakes. A struck-through error is another category worth understanding, where foreign material comes between the die and planchet during striking and leaves an unusual impression, missing detail, or distorted portion of the design. The size, location, and nature of the struck-through area can influence collector interest. A weak strike can also create areas where design details appear unusually soft, although weak strikes are generally much less valuable than major recognized errors. Die cracks, die breaks, cuds, and retained die breaks can produce raised lines or unusual blobs of metal on the coin, and some dramatic examples become collectible because they document a specific stage in the life of a working die. Collectors may also search for die clashes, which can happen when opposing dies come together without a planchet between them, potentially transferring unintended design impressions from one die to another. A genuine clash can be fascinating because it represents an actual moment in the production history of the coin. Another important factor is condition. A 1981 cent that spent decades circulating may have scratches, discoloration, dents, corrosion, and worn details, while a sharply preserved specimen with strong original surfaces can be much more desirable. For copper cents and copper-plated cents from different eras, color designation and surface preservation can also influence collector demand, although a coin should never be judged solely by its brightness because cleaning or artificial alteration can reduce its desirability. This is particularly important when someone discovers an old cent that appears unusually shiny and assumes it must be rare. Polishing, chemical treatment, abrasive cleaning, and other post-mint alterations can actually hurt the value of a coin. Another major issue is authentication. If someone claims that a 1981 1 cent is worth $135 million because of a supposed error, the most important step is not to celebrate immediately but to verify the coin. Weight the coin using an accurate scale, measure its diameter and thickness when appropriate, inspect the edge, compare it with known examples, photograph the unusual feature clearly, and seek an opinion from a reputable numismatic expert or professional grading service if the characteristics appear genuinely unusual. Provenance can also matter, especially for exceptional coins, because documented history can help establish authenticity and explain why an unusual specimen exists. The possibility of a spectacular error makes searching through old collections exciting, but collectors should remain cautious about viral claims that assign enormous prices to ordinary coins. A coin does not become worth millions simply because a video, social media post, or online listing says so. Asking prices are not the same as confirmed auction results, and an extraordinary valuation requires extraordinary evidence. For a truly valuable 1981 cent, collectors would want to know exactly what makes it different, whether the difference happened at the United States Mint, whether experts recognize it as a legitimate variety or error, how rare comparable examples are, and whether serious collectors have demonstrated demand for that specific type of coin. Even when a coin is not worth a fortune, discovering a genuine error can still be exciting because it connects the collector directly with the manufacturing history of American coinage. Think about the journey of a cent produced in 1981. Metal was prepared, planchets were made, dies were manufactured, coins were struck at high speed, inspected, packaged, transported, distributed, and eventually placed into circulation. Somewhere within that enormous production process, occasional mistakes could occur, and some unusual pieces escaped normal detection. Those survivors are what keep error collectors searching. So if you have a 1981 1 cent at home, do not automatically assume that it is either worthless or a $135 million jackpot. Instead, examine it carefully and scientifically. Look at the date, mint mark, lettering, portrait, rim, edges, and reverse design. Check for genuine doubling rather than simple machine doubling. Look for major off-center strikes, unusual planchets, dramatic clips, broad strikes, die breaks, clashes, struck through areas, and other recognized mint errors. Pay attention to weight and dimensions because a wrong planchet error can sometimes reveal itself through measurable differences. Most importantly, avoid cleaning or altering the coin before having it examined, because an original surface can contain valuable information about its history and condition. The real treasure in coin collecting is not simply finding a huge number attached to a coin, it is discovering something authentic, unusual, historically interesting, and scarce enough to make collectors stop and take notice. The $135 million figure should therefore be understood as an extraordinary hypothetical headline rather than a guaranteed price for every 1981 cent, but the possibility of rare errors is exactly why millions of collectors continue checking old change. Sometimes the most interesting discovery is hiding in a coin that looks completely ordinary at first glance. So check your penny jars, inherited collections, old envelopes, drawers, and boxes, and compare what you find with reliable references before making any assumptions about value. If you discover a 1981 cent with a strange feature, last 1996 D1 cent coin. Today we are exploring the fascinating 1996 D1 cent coin, a Lincoln cent that can become especially interesting when unusual mint errors, rare varieties, exceptional condition, or other authenticated characteristics are discovered. If you have an old coin jar, a family collection, a forgotten box of pennies, or a group of coins that has been sitting untouched for years, this is exactly the kind of coin that deserves a careful second look, because while most 1996 D cents are ordinary circulation coins, a genuine mint error or unusual variety can make a particular example far more interesting to collectors. You may have heard dramatic claims that a 1996 D1 cent coin could be worth $130 million because of its errors and mistakes, but an enormous figure like that should be understood as an extraordinary hypothetical claim rather than the normal market value of a regular 1996 D cent. Most examples are not worth anywhere near such a figure, and an extraordinary valuation would require exceptional rarity, undeniable authentication, outstanding condition, documented provenance, and extraordinary collector demand. The real excitement comes from understanding what kinds of errors and unusual characteristics could make a 1996 D cent stand apart from millions of ordinary coins. One of the first possibilities collectors may investigate is an off-center strike. This happens when the planchet is not positioned correctly between the dies during striking, causing the design to appear shifted toward one side. A dramatic off-center strike can leave a large area of blank metal visible and may produce an unusual shape or incomplete design. The amount of displacement can matter, and an error that clearly demonstrates a significant minting problem can attract more attention than a tiny misalignment that is difficult to notice. Another possibility is a broad strike, which can occur when the collar does not properly contain the planchet during striking. Instead of maintaining the normal dimensions and edge characteristics of a cent, the metal can spread outward, producing a wider or distorted coin. When compared with a normal 1996 D cent, a genuine broad strike can be immediately noticeable and may become an interesting addition to an error collection. Collectors can also look for multiple strikes, where the coin is struck more than once and the second impression is shifted from the first. A genuine double strike may produce overlapping or duplicated portions of Lincoln's portrait, lettering, numbers, or other design elements. Some multiple strikes are subtle, while others are so dramatic that the error is obvious without magnification. Another area of interest is double die varieties. Genuine double dies result from a characteristic created during the die-making process and can show recognizable separation or duplication in portions of the design. However, this is one of the areas where collectors need to be especially cautious. Not every coin with apparent doubling has a valuable double die variety. Machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, flattening, and other forms of damage can create extra lines or distorted letters that may look impressive but do not have the same numismatic importance. The exact location, shape, and structure of the doubling should be studied carefully and compared with trusted references before making any claim about rarity or value. Die cracks are another fascinating possibility. During the life of a working die, repeated pressure and stress can eventually produce cracks. When such a die strikes a coin, the crack may appear as a raised line on the finished cent. In more dramatic cases, part of the die can break away and create a larger raised area known as a cud or die break. A significant die break can be desirable because it documents a particular stage in the life of the die and can sometimes be recognized as a distinctive mint-made feature. Struck-through errors are also worth understanding. These can happen when foreign material becomes trapped between the die and planchet during striking, leaving an indentation or area of missing detail on the finished coin. The appearance can vary greatly depending on what material was involved and where it was located. Collectors may also encounter clipped planchets, where part of the metal blank is missing before the coin is struck. A genuine clip can produce a distinctive missing section along the edge and may have other characteristics that help demonstrate that it occurred during the minting process. These kinds of errors are very different from post-mint damage. A coin can become scratched, bent, dented, chemically altered, polished, drilled, or otherwise damaged after leaving the mint, and those conditions usually do not make it a valuable error coin. Understanding the difference between a genuine mint-made error and accidental damage is one of the most important skills for anyone searching through old cents. If you see something unusual on a 1996 D cent, the first question should not be how much it is worth, but what caused the unusual feature. If the feature can be logically connected to the minting process, then it may deserve further research. If it appears to have happened after the coin entered circulation, it is generally not considered a valuable mint error. Condition can also play an important role. A heavily circulated 1996 D cent may have scratches, worn details, discoloration, and surface marks, while an exceptionally preserved example can retain sharp details and attractive original surfaces. High-grade survivors may attract additional attention, especially when combined with a recognized variety or genuine mint error. Collectors may inspect the Lincoln portrait, the date, the D mint mark, the lettering, the rim, and the overall strike. Sometimes a coin can look completely normal until it is placed beside another example from the same year and mint. Comparing coins side by side is one of the simplest ways to notice unusual differences. Look at the position of the design, the shape of the letters, the rim, the edge, and the surface. If something stands out, investigate it carefully instead of immediately assuming that it represents a fortune. Imagine finding a 1996 D cent in a jar that appears ordinary at first, then noticing that the design is dramatically off-center or that the edge has an unusual shape. Perhaps the coin has a distinctive die crack running through part of the design, or maybe there is a strange depression that could indicate a struck-through error. These discoveries are what make coin collecting so exciting. A coin that has been ignored for years can suddenly become interesting simply because someone noticed a detail that everyone else overlooked. Old collections are especially fascinating because previous owners may not have known about mint errors or varieties. A family member could have saved a handful of cents simply because they were old, while another collector might have purchased a group of coins without carefully examining every piece. A coin can pass through many hands before someone finally recognizes that it has an unusual characteristic. That possibility is one reason treasure hunters continue checking old change and collections. However, the $130 million claim should never be treated as a guaranteed price for a 1996 D cent. Huge valuations require credible evidence, and a coin would need to be exceptionally rare, authenticated, and strongly desired by collectors before any extreme figure could be seriously discussed. Verified auction results, professional grading, expert opinions, and documented provenance are much more reliable than a random price listed online. If you believe you have found a major error, do not clean or polish the coin. Cleaning can scratch the surface, remove original characteristics, and reduce collector appeal. Handle the coin carefully by its edges and keep it protected while researching it. If the suspected feature appears genuinely significant, professional authentication can help determine whether it is a real mint error, a recognized variety, or simply damage. Professional evaluation can also help determine the coin's condition, which is important because condition can have a major impact on collector interest. Another possibility involves planchet abnormalities. Before a coin is struck, the metal blank must meet certain requirements for size, shape, and composition. If something unusual happens to the blank before striking, the resulting coin can sometimes show characteristics that collectors find interesting. But once again, not every unusual surface or color is a mint error. Environmental exposure, chemicals, heat, moisture, and other conditions can change the appearance of a cent after it leaves the mint. That is why experienced collectors focus on evidence rather than excitement alone. The story behind genuine mint errors is fascinating because every error represents something that went differently from the intended production process. An off-center strike tells us the planchet was improperly positioned. A broad strike indicates a problem involving the collar. A multiple strike demonstrates that the coin received more than one impression. A die crack records stress or damage in the die. A cud shows that part of the die broke away. A struck-through error reveals interference from foreign material. A clipped planchet can show that the blank itself was improperly cut before striking. These tiny clues can preserve a piece of the minting process for decades. That is what makes error coins more than simple mistakes. They are physical records